The streets of Rome glittered with marble, gold, and the roar of triumphs. Yet hidden behind its glory lived a darker story, one that touched every home, every family, and every woman who carried the name of a bride. Marriage in this world was not about love. It was a chain, a trap, a silent bargain signed in shadows. From the very beginning, daughters were not seen as children to be cherished, but as keys, waiting to unlock alliances, power, and wealth. Fathers calculated, mothers whispered, and the girl herself had no voice. Her future was sealed long before she ever understood what the word marriage truly meant. A Roman household was ruled by the paterfamilias, the father, the absolute master of the family. His will was law, his command unquestioned. Even his grown sons bent to his decisions. But daughters, they were even less free. They were gifts to be given away, tokens to seal bonds between families. Imagine a girl of 10 watching her father at the dinner table as he discussed her destiny with strangers. She might still be playing with dolls carved from clay, yet the men around her spoke of dowries, land, and politics. To them, she was not a child. She was an investment. The wedding veil, the garlands, the music, all were symbols dressed in beauty, but drenched in control. To an outsider, the Roman wedding looked festive, sacred, divine. Yet to the bride, it was a beginning of captivity. That orange veil she wore, the flammeum, was not only tradition, it was a mask, a reminder that she no longer belonged to herself. The guests clapped, the torches lit the way, but the girl's steps grew heavy as she was led to a man she often barely knew. He might be 20 years older. He might already have other lovers or wives cast aside. None of it mattered. Her father had chosen, and Rome approved. To love was not her choice. To marry was not her choice. Her life was bargained for at the hands of men who believed her worth rested in obedience. And behind the veil, waiting in the shadows of the marriage bed, was a man who owned her breath, her body, her silence. The Romans told themselves marriage was sacred. They spoke of God's blessing the union. They said it brought stability to the empire. Yet beneath those grand words, cruelty thrived. Girls were married as soon as their bodies could bear children. 12, 13, sometimes even younger. It was seen as practical, a way to ensure heirs as quickly as possible. No thought was given to the child's mind, her fears, her dreams. Once the vows were spoken, she crossed a threshold she could never return from. Her husband became her master. Her father gave up all rights to her, as if handing over property in an exchange. And from that moment, her survival depended on her silence. Some tried to resist. Some cried. But resistance was useless. Rome was not built for soft voices. A girl's tears meant nothing when compared to the weight of land, wealth, or reputation. She was told this was her duty, her honor, her place in the eternal city. The feast after the ceremony sparkled with food, wine, and laughter. Guests celebrated, pretending the marriage was joyous. But for the bride, every smile cut like a blade. She sat at the center of attention, yet felt utterly invisible. Her husband might whisper to friends, boasting of his new prize. Her father might count the coins of her dowry in his mind. But she sat silent, veiled, chained by expectation. The hall smelled of roasted meats and wine, but to her, it was a stench of captivity. Marriage in Rome was more than family. It was politics. Senators used their daughters to rise in power, tying themselves to noble bloodlines. Generals bound themselves to wealthy families to secure fortune for war. Even emperors traded women like pawns in their games. Behind every throne, every seat of power, stood a wife who had no say in her own life. Her smile at banquets was demanded, not chosen. Her children were raised to serve Rome, not to love their mother. She was honored in public, but imprisoned in private. To the Romans, love was weakness. Passion was dangerous. A man could keep mistresses, visit prostitutes, or chase pleasures freely. But a wife, her role was to endure, to remain silent, to bear sons. Some poets whisper of love in their verses, speaking of women with beauty and grace. But these were words meant for mistresses, not wives. A wife's worth was not measured by affection. It was measured by her obedience, her ability to stay quiet, her skill at spinning wool and raising heirs. And so, Every Roman bride walked into a house where she was less than human. She was a duty, a vessel, a shadow behind her husband's glory. The cruelty of this system was not hidden. It was celebrated. Fathers bragged about advantageous matches. Husbands boasted of their control. Society praised the silent wife as the perfect model. On carved tombstones, husbands wrote the same words again and again. She was loyal. She was dutiful. She was silent. These were not tributes of love. They were reminders of submission. Even in death, the chain remained. The girl who once played in gardens became a name on a stone, remembered not for who she was, but for how well she obeyed. And so the trap of Roman marriage was set long before the veil touched her hair. From childhood, she was prepared for obedience. From the moment of her wedding, she was bound to a man who owned her life. And from that day forward, every breath she took belonged not to herself, but to him. It was not romance. It was not freedom. It was survival within chains. The feast might end, the torches might fade, and the guests might leave, but the true prison of marriage had only just begun. For behind the laughter of weddings lay a silence more terrifying than death itself. The feast was over. The torches dimmed. The music faded into the night. For the young bride, the mask of celebration slipped away, and the weight of her new life pressed down. She was barely more than a child. Yet in Rome, childhood was not a shield. It was a brief pause before chains were fastened. At 12, a girl was already considered ready for marriage. Not ready in her body, not ready in her heart, but ready in the eyes of men who saw her as a vessel for heirs and alliances. Her childhood toys were taken, her laughter silenced. The moment the veil touched her hair, she was no longer seen as a daughter, but as a wife, a role she never asked for, demanded of her by fathers and laws that worship power over innocence. Imagine a girl seated in her new husband's home. The walls were cold stone, the air heavy with incense. She had never left her father's side before, and now she sat among strangers. Servants watched her closely, waiting for her first command, though she did not yet understand her place. Her husband, a man twice or three times her age, looked at her not as a companion, but as an obligation fulfilled. She was there to serve him, to obey him, to bring him children. Her body was not yet grown, but none of that mattered. Roman law did not measure readiness by years or health. It measured readiness by usefulness. A young bride was seen as pliable, easier to mold, easier to control. She was trained quickly. She was taught to rise at dawn, to spin wool, to pour wine, to manage servants. Her world narrowed to the duties of the household. Her worth was no longer her spirit or her mind. It was the children she could produce. If her body broke under the weight of childbirth, Rome would not weep. Rome would simply demand another bride to take her place. In Rome, these young brides were not shielded. They were paraded. A girl of 12 could walk into a marriage feast where her husband's friends, grizzled with age, whispered and laughed as if she were a trophy. She sat silent while others judged her appearance, her dowry, her future. Her husband's expectations were heavy. He wanted heirs quickly, sons to carry his name. If she gave him daughters, she might be mocked. If she gave him nothing, she might be discarded. The pressure was endless, suffocating. For a 12-year-old bride, every day became a test she could not pass. Too young to understand, too powerless to refuse, she lived in a state of constant fear. Fear of failure, fear of her husband's anger, fear of the judgment that awaited her if she stumbled even once. The cruelty lay not only in the marriage itself, but in the silence that surrounded it. Neighbors knew, families knew, Rome itself knew, yet no one questioned the practice. It was tradition, it was law, it was the way things had always been. A girl's body was never her own. Her future was sold before she could speak of dreams. Some whispered in secret. Mothers who had endured the same fate tried to prepare their daughters with warnings, soft words spoken in kitchens and gardens. They told them to be silent, to endure, to bow their heads. Survival was the only advice they could give. But for the young bride, survival meant sacrificing herself piece by piece. Every smile was forced. Every step was measured. She lived not for her own heart, but for the empire's demand that she obey. Her husband's control was absolute. He could dictate her meals, her clothing, her movements. She could not attend a gathering without his permission. She could not spend coins without his approval. Even her friendships were policed. A laugh with the wrong man, a glance too long, and whispers could spread that she was unfaithful. Unfaithfulness was not always proven by actions. Sometimes suspicion was enough. A rumor could destroy her life. A false accusation could end her in disgrace or death. The younger the bride, the easier it was for her husband to shape her into submission, to silence her questions, to smother her spirit before it ever had a chance to grow. And yet, some of these children dreamed of love. They dreamed of companionship, of kindness, of someone who might hold them without cruelty. But in Rome, such dreams were dangerous. To seek love outside her husband's control was treason. To hope for gentleness was weakness. A 12-year-old bride who whispered of love was seen as foolish. She was reminded again and again, marriage was duty, not desire. If her heart longed for something else, she had to bury it in silence. For a Roman woman, silence was the only safe secret. There were those who broke under the strain. Some young brides fell into despair, their health fading as the weight of expectation crushed them. Others died in childbirth, their fragile bodies unable to survive the pain of bearing children too soon. And yet their deaths were not mourned as tragedies, but spoken of as the cost of life in Rome. Families moved on quickly. Fathers arranged new marriages for younger daughters. Husbands found new brides, younger still, to replace the ones lost. The cycle continued, endless and merciless. The cruelty of the system was masked in ritual. At the wedding, the bride was carried over the threshold, not for romance, but because Rome believed bad luck might strike if she tripped. Guests laughed as if it were tradition, but beneath the laughter was truth. She was carried because she did not walk willingly. She was carried because she was being taken, claimed, and trapped. The orange veil, the torches, the music, all were symbols dressed in joy but soaked in control. Every gesture of the ceremony whispered the same truth. The girl did not belong to herself anymore. Some Roman men praised these marriages. They said young brides brought purity, obedience, and loyalty. They bragged of their control, proud that their wives were too timid to defy them. A wife who was silent was praised. A wife who obeyed was honored. But silence was not devotion. Obedience was not love. It was survival for a child forced to grow too quickly, forced to live as a wife before she even understood the meaning of the word. The cities celebrated victory after victory. Emperors rose and fell. Temples gleamed in the sun. But inside countless homes, young brides sat in silence, their eyes lowered, their voices swallowed. They were invisible in Rome's glory, remembered only as names in marriage contracts or as mothers of heirs. No poet sang of their suffering. No statue carried their likeness. Their stories were written only in the dark silence of their lives and in the shadows of their tombstones. This was the true horror of becoming a bride in ancient Rome at 12. Childhood stolen, innocence erased, a life exchanged for duty. She was expected to bear children before her body was ready, expected to serve a husband decades older, expected to obey in silence while the world called her marriage a blessing. For her, love was not a dream. It was a danger. To resist was unthinkable. To dream of freedom was forbidden. The young bride had stepped into her husband's house, but she had not stepped into freedom. She had only moved from one ruler to another, from her father's authority into her husband's absolute control. Roman law called it patria potestas, the power of the father, and later, the husband, to the world. It sounded like order and duty, but to the woman who lived beneath it, it was a sentence. Her life was not her own. Her voice was not her own. Even her body was not her own. From the moment she entered the marriage bed, she belonged to him in every way. His word was fate, and his anger was law. Inside the Roman household, the husband stood as a living tyrant. He decided when she could leave the house, whom she could speak to, what she could wear, and how she should live. A wife who dared to disobey did not meet reason. She met wrath. The cruelty of this power was sharpened by Rome's silence. Society did not question his authority. Neighbors who heard the cries of a beaten wife did not intervene. Servants who saw bruises whispered in secret, but never spoke aloud. To challenge a husband's rights was to challenge Rome itself, and no one dared. Imagine the tension of such a life. Every step a wife took inside her husband's home carried weight. A glance held too long at another man could mean suspicion. A meal not prepared to his liking could mean rage. Even silence could be dangerous if he believed it hid betrayal. A wife learned quickly to measure her words, her movements, even her breath. She learned to read her husband's moods as if her survival depended on it. Because it did, the law handed the husband a weapon sharper than any blade: the right to judge his wife's faithfulness. He did not need evidence. He did not need witnesses. His suspicion was enough. If he believed she strayed, he could punish her as he saw fit. Some women were locked away, condemned to lonely rooms where their voices echoed against the walls until madness took them. Others were strangled, poisoned, or quietly erased. Rome did not demand justice for them, because Rome believed their lives belonged to their husbands. The city that built aqueducts and monuments, that boasted of order and law, gave no protection to the women inside its homes. To be a wife was to be trapped in a prison built not of stone but of obedience. The cruelty extended even to life itself. Roman law allowed a husband to end his wife's life if he judged her guilty of adultery. He did not stand trial for this. He did not face punishment. He stood as judge, jury, and executioner, empowered by a society that placed male honor above female existence. This power was not hidden. It was accepted. Families encouraged husbands to act decisively if their wives shamed them. Fathers gave their blessing for their daughters' lives to be cut short if dishonor was suspected. Death was not scandal. It was seen as the rightful punishment for betrayal. And yet, betrayal did not always exist. Sometimes suspicion was enough. Sometimes ambition. A husband who wanted freedom or wealth or a new bride could accuse his wife and end her life with a single word. Rome turned its face away. For a wife, love became a dangerous dream. To love her husband might mean safety if he was kind, but kindness was fragile. It could turn to cruelty without warning. To love anyone else was unthinkable. Her heart had to be buried in silence, for its beating could betray her. Even her children were not truly her own. Her husband decided their fate, their upbringing, their inheritance. A mother who loved too deeply lived with constant fear. Fear that her child might be taken, abandoned, or raised by others if her husband willed it. Her home, her family, her very existence, all rested on the temper of one man. The tyranny of the husband was not only personal, it was political. Powerful men used their wives to rise in Rome, controlling their marriages as they controlled provinces and armies. If a wife brought disgrace, his career could suffer, his reputation could be stained. And so, she became a tool for ambition. Her silence demanded not only in the home, but in the eyes of the empire. In public, she smiled. At banquets, she sat adorned in jewels. To strangers, she looked like a figure of wealth and grace. But behind the walls of her house, she lived under constant judgment. Her beauty could not save her. Her obedience could not save her. Only her husband's favor could decide her fate. Some men wielded this power with cruelty, others with cold indifference. Few offered gentleness, and even those who did could take it away at a moment's notice. For a wife, trust was a fragile illusion. She could never forget that her life was bound to his will. Even in moments of peace, fear lingered. A hand that caressed her one day could strike her the next. A voice that praised her could condemn her with a single whisper. The air of the Roman household was thick with secrecy, suspicion, and dread. The poets and writers of Rome praised male authority. They told husbands to guard their wives, to control them, to keep them hidden from temptation. Advice columns of the ancient world spoke of women as creatures to be restrained, not partners to be cherished. And so, the tyranny of the husband was not an accident of cruelty. It was a design of Rome itself. It was the empire's will, written into law, carved into stone, and passed down from father to son. For the wives, survival meant silence. They learned to lower their eyes, to obey without question, to endure without complaint. They stitched their fears into wool, hid their sorrows behind veils, and prayed that their obedience would keep them safe. But safety was fragile. No matter how loyal, how silent, how dutiful a wife became, her life remained uncertain. Her fate could change with her husband's suspicion, with his anger, or with his ambition. She was never free. She was never secure. Her home was not a sanctuary. It was a cage gilded with marble, decorated with wealth, but a cage nonetheless. This was the true tyranny of the husband, a rule not only of law, but of fear, a power that turned marriage into servitude, that turned wives into shadows, that silenced voices before they could even speak. Rome called it order. Rome called it tradition. But for the women who lived beneath it, it was bondage, a lifelong chain that ended only in death. The chains of Roman marriage were heavy, yet even those chains could be broken with shocking ease, not by the wife, but by the husband. For in Rome, divorce was simple, too simple. A man needed only to speak a few words, to send his wife away with nothing but shame at her heels. There were no trials, no witnesses, no protection. With a gesture, a husband could erase years of union, tear apart the life of a woman, and walk away untouched. Her vows, her obedience, her sacrifices, all dissolved in a moment. What remained was not freedom. What remained was ruin. The Roman elite wore divorce like a cloak, discarding one wife and taking another whenever it suited their ambition. A marriage that had once been praised as holy could be shattered in the span of an evening. The reasons varied, but they were rarely just. A husband might claim his wife was barren, though it was often he who was at fault. He might accuse her of infidelity without proof, simply to clear his bed for a younger bride. Or he might grow weary of her silence, of her age, of her very presence. And Rome allowed it. Rome encouraged it. For men, divorce was a privilege. For women, it was a death sentence in life. The wife cast aside carried a stain that could never be washed away. Neighbors whispered that she had failed. Families distanced themselves in shame. Rumors clung to her name like shadows, suggesting sins she had never committed. Even if her husband had been cruel, even if she had been loyal, none of it mattered. Divorce meant disgrace. The world believed she was unworthy. The cruelest fate awaited those sent from one husband to another. Many women were passed around like coins exchanged in the market, traded for alliances, discarded when no longer useful. Their names became whispers of mockery. Their lives reminders of fragility of a woman's place. A divorced woman could remarry, but remarriage did not bring her honor back. It only deepened the whispers. Men treated her as damaged, as lesser, as someone to use but never to respect. Her dowry might be reduced, her position in society weakened, and if she was sent back to her father's home, she returned not as a daughter but as a burden, a reminder of failure in a world that offered her no chance to defend herself. For men, divorce was freedom. For women, it was exile from dignity. The cruelty of Roman divorce was sharpened by its hypocrisy. Men could boast of their many marriages, wearing them as signs of influence. Some of Rome's most powerful figures married and divorced countless times. Each new wife a step toward greater wealth or status. But a woman who endured the same fate was mocked, shamed, and stripped of respect. The same act that raised a man destroyed a woman. Such was the twisted balance of Rome's law. The pain of divorce did not end with reputation. It followed into daily life. A divorced wife could lose her children, as Roman law gave the father full control. She might never see them again. To carry a child for 9 months, to raise it through sickness, to watch it laugh and learn, only to have it torn away at a husband's word. Few cruelties cut deeper. The child was told the mother had failed, that she was unworthy. Generations of silence were built on these lies, leaving scars no one could erase. Yet even in such ruin, some husbands found new ways to wound. They demanded back the dowry, stripping the woman not only of dignity, but of wealth. Families who once protected her turned cold, blaming her for the loss. She stood abandoned, with neither money nor honor, left to fade into the background of Roman life, where no one spoke her name except in whispers. Divorce was not always born from anger or betrayal. Sometimes it was cold calculation. A senator might discard his wife to marry the daughter of a wealthier man. A general might send his wife away to link himself to another family's bloodline. Ambition guided many divorces, and women were sacrificed like pawns on a board too vast for them to see. For every broken marriage, a man rose in power while a woman sank in disgrace. Such was the cruel arithmetic of Roman society. Even the emperors played this game. One emperor cast away his wife after accusing her of minor faults, replacing her with a younger woman of noble blood. Another discarded his empress simply because he desired someone new. These choices were praised as clever politics, not condemned as betrayal. What the empire celebrated in men, it punished in women. This hypocrisy was etched into the very soul of Roman marriage. The cruelty was not only in public humiliation, it was in the silence that followed. A divorced woman was often left alone, without support, her days empty of companionship or purpose. Once she had been mistress of a household. Now she was a shadow, waiting in the margins of life, spoken of only in rumors. Her fate was not her own. Her story was not hers to tell. It belonged to the men who discarded her, to the society that branded her, to the empire that never valued her as human. The game of divorce revealed the darkest truth of Roman marriage, that women were never truly wives. They were placeholders, tools, symbols. When useful, they were praised. When no longer useful, they were erased. Their tears did not move the law. Their pleas did not move their husbands. They lived at the mercy of power they could never touch. And yet, for all its cruelty, some wives learned that being cast aside was not always the worst fate. For behind the locked doors of Rome, there were terrors greater than disgrace. For some, the shame of divorce was easier than the pain of staying. For some, exile was kinder than obedience. The cruelty of divorce was sharp, but not every wife was cast aside. Many remained, bound not by love but by fear. Behind the marble walls of Roman homes, beyond the torches that lit the grand dining halls, there lived another Rome, a silent Rome, a Rome where wives endured blows and bruises in the dark, where their cries dissolved into stone walls, and where justice never came. The empire admired strength, conquest, and power, but that admiration came at a cost. The suffering of women was invisible. Inside the household, the husband's hand was law. If anger flared, his wife became the target. A misplaced word, a forgotten duty, a look he did not like. Any of these could summon his rage. Beatings were common. They were expected. Rome called them discipline, not cruelty. A wife's pain was not seen as tragedy, but as correction. Her body became the canvas on which her husband wrote his authority. The courts offered her nothing. No judge would listen to a wife's complaint. No law recognized her tears. To accuse a husband was to accuse the very structure of Rome itself. And such defiance was unthinkable. Neighbors heard the sounds, thuds in the night, cries muffled by thick walls, silence that followed too quickly. Servants saw the bruises, the trembling hands, the eyes lowered in fear. Yet none dared intervene. To speak was to risk ruin. To challenge a husband's rights was to invite wrath upon oneself. And so, silence reigned. Silence thicker than the darkness of night. Silence that made the pain worse. For it proved that no one would come. The empire praised the strong man who ruled with iron. It glorified the soldier who conquered foreign lands, the general who crushed rebellions, the father who commanded obedience. A husband who struck his wife was not condemned. He was seen as fulfilling his role. For Rome believed a wife must be molded, bent, and tamed. To discipline her was not cruelty. It was duty. Her blood was the price of her silence. Some husbands turned their homes into prisons. They locked their wives in chambers, restricting their movements, monitoring every word. A wife who attempted to speak her mind was silenced with threats. A wife who dreamed of freedom was met with violence. Others used humiliation as their weapon. They insulted their wives before guests, mocking their appearance, their voices, their worth. They paraded mistresses openly, reminding their wives that they were replaceable, disposable. Every act chipped away at the woman's spirit, leaving her a hollow shadow. For a Roman wife, life became a performance. She smiled at feasts, spoke gently in public, appeared dutiful in every gesture. But beneath the surface, she carried bruises hidden by clothing, scars concealed by silence. To resist was dangerous. To cry out was useless. Her only hope was to endure, to wait for the storm of her husband's anger to pass, knowing it would return again and again. Even the wealthy, those draped in jewels and gold, were not safe. The wife of a senator or a general lived in as much fear as the wife of a common merchant. Wealth did not shield her. Power did not protect her. For in Rome, the husband's authority was absolute, and no title, no dowry, no noble birth could change it. Behind the grandeur of Rome's elite houses lay stories of women who suffered in silence, their cries swallowed by the very empire that praised their husbands as leaders. Some women bore the violence until their bodies failed them. Their deaths were not recorded as murder, but as natural misfortune. Others were discarded when their husbands tired of them, cast out after years of pain, left broken in spirit and body. Their lives were not remembered. Their names were not spoken. Rome built monuments to its soldiers, its emperors, its generals, but not to the wives who endured violence in the shadows. The cruelty spread across generations. Daughters watched their mothers suffer and learned the lessons of silence. They learned to lower their voices, to avoid defiance, to accept pain as the natural rhythm of marriage. Sons watched their fathers strike and absorbed the lesson of power, ready to repeat the cycle in their own homes. And so, violence became inheritance. It lived in the walls of Roman homes, passed like a curse from one generation to the next. Some whispered in secret that not all husbands were cruel. A few showed gentleness. A few offered kindness. But such men were rare, and even they held the power to change at any moment. A wife could never be certain. A smile today could turn into a blow tomorrow. The uncertainty itself was its own form of torment. For in Rome, safety was never guaranteed. The poets who praised marriage did not speak of these shadows. The historians who wrote of emperors did not write of suffering wives. The empire's glory was carved in stone, but its cruelty was hidden in silence. Yet the silence itself was telling. Rome's laws never once protected a wife from violence. Rome's courts never once gave her a voice. Her suffering was erased, unrecorded, forgotten. But history whispers, if one listens closely, in fragments of letters, in quiet stories passed through generations, in the faint traces of sorrow carved into tombstones, the truth lingers. The truth of a world where wives were beaten, silenced, and abandoned, and no one came to their aid. Marriage in Rome was not the sanctuary it claimed to be. It was a stage for cruelty, a cage where violence was both accepted and ignored. Behind every door could be a tragedy. Behind every smile could be a bruise. And behind every silence was fear. This was the life of a wife in ancient Rome. A life of endurance, of pain without justice, of survival without hope. The shadows of violence lingered in Roman homes, but even when blows did not fall, the chains of obedience bound wives more tightly than any iron. For the empire demanded more than silence. It demanded invisibility. A wife was not meant to live for herself. She was meant to serve, to vanish, to endure without question. Rome called it virtue, but for the women who lived it, it was another form of captivity. Every Roman household expected the same duties. A wife was to spin wool, her hands forever busy with thread, weaving not only clothing but the image of her obedience. She was to manage servants, kitchens, and children, ensuring order while never drawing attention to herself. Her worth was measured not by laughter or wisdom, but by how well she disappeared into her husband's shadow. She was not free to walk the streets. She was not free to eat at a feast without permission. She was not free to speak openly in the presence of men. Her steps were counted, her words weighed, her very presence restrained. The empire prided itself on conquest abroad, but inside its walls, it conquered its wives with silence. A Roman wife's body was not her own. It was demanded for heirs, sons to carry the family name, daughters to be bartered in future marriages. She was expected to produce children without hesitation, without complaint. If she failed, suspicion fell heavy upon her. If she bore too many daughters, whispers followed her. If she bore no children at all, she risked disgrace, abandonment, or replacement. Her body became a vessel, stripped of freedom, valued only for the lives it could bring forth. Her mind was treated no better. Education for women was rare, and when it existed, it was tightly controlled. A wife was told what to believe, how to act, when to remain silent. Independent thought was seen as rebellion. Curiosity was dangerous. The perfect wife was one who never spoke out of turn, who never questioned, who never imagined life beyond the walls of her husband's house. And so, many wives buried their thoughts in silence, their dreams hidden deep where no one could find them. They lived entire lives without ever being truly known. Some tried to carve out small freedoms. They found moments of laughter with other women, stolen conversations in gardens or kitchens. They whispered secrets of sorrow, of longing, of despair. But even these moments carried risk. Servants could repeat what they heard. Neighbors could twist innocent words into dangerous rumors. And if a husband learned of them, punishment followed. To be seen was dangerous. To be heard was perilous. To be remembered was forbidden. The cruelty of obedience was sharpened by the illusion of honor. Rome praised its silent wives. Statues, poems, and tombstones celebrated women not for who they were, but for how well they obeyed. She was loyal. She was silent. She was dutiful. These words appeared again and again, carved into stone, etched into memory. But such praises were not tributes. They were cages. Even in death, a wife was remembered not for her soul, but for her submission. For many, life became a theater of endurance. A wife woke before dawn, oversaw the household, spun her wool, raised her children, and kept her silence. Day after day, year after year, her life passed in service to others, her own identity fading until nothing remained but obedience. It was a prison without walls, built not of stone but of duty, silence, and fear. The deeper cruelty lay in what was forbidden. A wife could not choose her companions. She could not choose her passions. She could not choose her love. To desire freedom was to betray tradition. To seek affection beyond her husband was to risk her life. To dream of happiness was to invite ruin. Even kindness was not guaranteed. A husband could one day smile, the next day strike. A wife never knew which face she would meet, and so she learned to bury hope before it betrayed her. Some women endured this fate with resignation, convincing themselves obedience was their duty. Others carried bitterness in silence, their hearts heavy with longing. And a few dared to defy, to whisper love outside their chains. But Rome had no mercy for such defiance. A wife who broke her obedience, who let her heart stray beyond her husband, faced the deadliest punishment of all. For in Rome, the crime of love was answered with death. And when love itself dared to bloom outside the marriage, the punishment was death. The walls of Roman homes were built to contain silence. Yet within those walls, hearts still beat with forbidden desires. A wife could obey, endure, and remain invisible. But if love dared escape the chains of marriage, the punishment was merciless. For in Rome, adultery was no ordinary sin. It was the deadliest crime a wife could commit. Her husband might betray her openly, keeping mistresses, slaves, or courtesans without shame. His disloyalty was excused, even admired. But a wife, her heart belonged not to herself, not even to the gods. It belonged to him. To love beyond her husband's control was treated not as passion, but as treason. Rome declared it so. The law of Augustus made adultery a crime, one punishable by exile, disgrace, and even death. The empire cloaked its cruelty in order, claiming it defended honor. But what it defended was control. Control over women, control over desire, control over life itself. The accusations did not need proof. A whisper could ignite suspicion. A rumor could destroy her. A wife accused of adultery was dragged before her family, her name stained, her future sealed. If guilty, she could be cast out into exile, sent to barren islands where the sea swallowed her cries. Her name was struck from memory, her presence erased. For others, exile was denied. Instead, death came in silence. Some were strangled in their chambers, the breath stolen from their bodies by order of their husbands. Others drank poison, forced upon them under the pretense of honor. A few met the blade, cut down by their own fathers or brothers, who chose blood over disgrace. The empire turned away. These deaths were not seen as murders. They were seen as justice. Imagine the terror of such a life. A wife who merely smiled at another man too long could face accusation. A servant's whisper, a neighbor's glance, a husband's jealousy. Any of these could end her, even if innocent. Her silence condemned her. To speak in defense was to challenge the authority of her husband, of her father, of Rome itself. Few dared to risk such defiance. And so, many wives lived in constant fear, guarding every glance, every word, every step. Their lives became a performance of loyalty, their hearts buried beneath layers of caution. Yet love, even forbidden, sometimes bloomed. A wife trapped in a loveless union might find solace in a stolen look, a whispered word, a secret touch. For a moment, she might believe in tenderness, in the possibility of affection. But such hope was fragile, destined for ruin. If discovered, the price was blood. History whispers of noble women exiled for secret affairs, their names cursed in scandal. Some were punished more brutally, cut off and their children stripped of wealth, erased from memory. Their lovers often faced death too, slaughtered as examples of Rome's authority. Love that defied marriage was painted as corruption, poison to the empire. To love freely was to sign one's own death. The cruelty was not limited to noble women. Across every rank of Rome, wives lived under the same law. Whether in villas of marble or houses of clay, their bodies belonged to their husbands, their choices policed by family and tradition. A farmer's wife, accused of adultery, could be beaten until life left her body. A merchant's wife could be cast into the streets, disgraced, without coin or home. A noble woman might face exile or execution, her name spoken in hushed tones as a warning. No woman was safe, even when guilt was not proven. Suspicion alone ruined her. Children could be taken, her dowry stolen, her reputation destroyed. To live under suspicion was to live in a shadow darker than death. For Rome's society was merciless. A divorced woman carried disgrace, but a woman accused of adultery carried a curse. No family wished to claim her. No friend wished to defend her. She became an outcast, alive but erased, her existence marked only by whispers. Some husbands used the charge of adultery as a weapon. If a man desired another bride, if he wished to claim a larger dowry, if he grew tired of the woman in his home, he could accuse her and be rid of her. Rome permitted it. Rome encouraged it. His word was enough. For the law was never about purity. It was about power. A man's honor could not be questioned, but a woman's loyalty could always be doubted. This imbalance was a design, not the accident of Roman marriage. The empire cloaked its cruelty in the name of morality. Augustus himself declared that adultery was a crime against Rome, that it weakened the state, that it corrupted the blood of families. He made examples of women, banishing even his own daughter to prove that no one stood above the law. But the law was never equal. A man could sin freely, and Rome looked away. A woman who strayed, even in whispers, faced ruin. Thus, the law became not protection, but a blade held at the throat of every wife. The tombstones of Rome speak louder than the poets. Many praise wives for their chastity above all else. She was loyal. She was pure. She never broke her vows. These words repeated like curses, reminders of what Rome demanded. They were not praises of love. They were chains carved into stone. The crime of adultery turned marriage into a battlefield. A wife did not merely live under her husband's control. She lived under the constant threat of death. Her silence could not always save her. Her loyalty could not always protect her. For a husband's suspicion was enough, and suspicion was everywhere. And yet, even for those who obeyed every command, who silenced every dream, who buried every forbidden thought, there remained another terror. For even loyalty could not save her, for childbirth itself became a battlefield. Marriage in Rome was not only a chain of control, it was a gamble with life itself. For every wife, the greatest danger did not always come from her husband's suspicion or society's cruel judgment. It came from the very expectation Rome demanded most: childbirth. A wife's body was seen as a vessel, meant to produce heirs for the family name, sons to inherit wealth, daughters to be married off for alliances. A woman's worth was not measured in her wisdom or her happiness, but in the number of children she could bring into the world. Yet childbirth was no blessing. It was a battlefield where countless women fought and lost their lives. Without medicine, without knowledge of infection, without safe practices, childbirth in Rome was deadly. Women bled to death, their cries echoing in chambers where no help could reach them. Fever consumed them after delivery, their bodies poisoned from within. Labor lasted days, breaking both body and spirit. For many wives, each pregnancy was a sentence of pain and often a march toward the grave. The irony was cruel. Rome praised its women for obedience, for chastity, for silence. But above all, it praised them for giving birth. A wife who bore many children was honored. A wife who failed was shamed. And so, wives endured pregnancy after pregnancy, each one more dangerous than the last, each one a greater risk to their fragile health. Few reached old age. Many died in their 20s or 30s, leaving behind husbands who soon remarried and children raised by others. Their lives were short, consumed by duty, extinguished by the very role Rome demanded they fulfill. There are tombstones across the empire carved with sorrowful truths. Inscriptions tell of wives who died too soon in childbirth. Husbands praise them as dutiful, never as joyous. The stone bore no mention of their suffering, only of their service to family and Rome. The empire wept for soldiers lost in battle, but for wives lost in childbirth, there was only silence. For a Roman wife, pain was expected. Her cries in labor were not met with compassion, but with endurance praised as virtue. She was told to bear it silently, to suffer with dignity, to accept her fate. If she lived, she was praised for her strength. If she died, she was remembered for her duty. Either way, her body was seen not as her own, but as a sacrifice for Rome's bloodlines. The dangers of childbirth were no secret. Women spoke of them in hushed voices, mothers warning daughters of the agony ahead. Every wife knew the risk, yet none could escape it. Even those who feared death, even those whose bodies were already weakened, were still expected to continue bearing children. Refusal was not an option. Silence was demanded. A wife could feel death in her womb, but she could not speak against the expectations of her husband, her family, her empire. The tragedies were endless. A young wife, barely more than a child, forced into marriage at 12, dead by 15 in her first childbirth. A noble woman, married to a senator, lost after delivering her fourth child. Her wealth unable to shield her from fate. A farmer's wife, nameless in history, perishing in a small hut, her body buried without record. From the poorest homes to the grandest palaces, death did not choose. Every woman carried the same risk. Every wife carried the same fear. Even in survival, the scars lingered. Many women were left weak, broken, unable to bear more children. Some lived with constant pain, their health shattered by repeated labors. But Rome showed no mercy. A wife unable to produce more heirs was often discarded, divorced, or ignored. Her silence now joined by isolation. The womb that once defined her worth became the reason for her abandonment. And yet, Rome celebrated fertility as the greatest honor. Statues and coins depicted goddesses of motherhood, symbols of abundance. Women were told to admire these figures, to accept their role as sacred. But sacred did not mean safe. Sacred did not mean kind. For the empire worshipped motherhood in word, while sacrificing mothers in reality. Even when a wife died in childbirth, her story was not her own. Her death was remembered only in how it affected her husband, her family, or the heirs she left behind. A husband remarried quickly, securing another womb to carry his line. A family mourned the loss of their daughter only as it weakened their alliances. The woman herself vanished, her suffering buried in silence. Her life was reduced to a single line on a stone, her voice never heard. This was the cruelest irony of Roman marriage. A wife gave everything, her body, her voice, her freedom, her very life, and still she was not truly remembered. She became a vessel for heirs, and when the vessel broke, It was simply replaced. Childbirth was not only the end of many lives, it was the proof that wives in Rome were seen as expendable. Some women tried to resist. Some prayed to goddesses for protection, offering sacrifices for safe delivery. Others clung to herbs and remedies, hoping to survive where medicine could not save them. But for many, prayers went unanswered, remedies failed, and hope dissolved into cries of agony that ended in silence. Their blood became the foundation of Rome's families. Their deaths became the unspoken cost of its glory. Marriage for Roman women was a gamble where the stakes were always their lives. They lived in silence. They suffered in silence, and many died in silence. And yet, even in death, their bodies were not free. Yet, even in death, her body was not her own. Death came for Roman wives not as freedom, but as another form of captivity. Even when their bodies lay cold, their spirits chained, their names carved into stone, the grip of their husbands did not loosen. In life, they were silenced by duty. In death, they were silenced by memory. Roman tombstones stand as witnesses to this truth. Across the empire, inscriptions written by husbands tell the same story. The same words appear again and again, etched into marble and limestone, as if they were commandments. She was loyal. She was silent. She was dutiful. To modern eyes, these words may appear as praise, but in their time, they were reminders of control. The husband chose which qualities to immortalize. He chose to honor not her laughter, not her dreams, not her soul, but her obedience. The tombstone was not her voice. It was his. Even in death, she did not speak for herself. The cruelty was subtle but absolute. Imagine a wife who endured years of suffering, who bore children in agony, who faced silence and violence within her home. When she died, the world could have remembered her struggle, her endurance, her humanity. But her stone carried only the lines her husband approved. He defined her even in death. If he wished, he could erase her completely. Some wives were buried without names, their existence swallowed in silence, their graves forgotten. Others were remembered only as a wife of their identities stripped away, their individuality erased. In life, she belonged to her husband's will. In death, she belonged to his words. Even grief was twisted into ownership. A husband might claim sorrow at her passing, but his mourning often focused on what she provided him. He grieved for the mother of his children, the keeper of his house, the woman who ensured his legacy. Rarely did he grieve for her as herself. Her worth was tied to service, her memory chained to duty. The empire that celebrated heroes with triumphal arches and generals with golden statues gave its wives only small stones, carved with obedience like shackles that lasted beyond the grave. Some tombs were crueler still. They carried inscriptions that reminded the living of a wife's failures. A line etched forever might condemn her as disobedient, as barren, as a warning to others. Her shame was made eternal, her silence absolute. A wife could not escape judgment in life, nor in death. Even the rituals of burial revealed this power. Husbands decided how their wives were honored, where they were buried, and what rites were performed. A wife could not choose her resting place. She could not choose her final words. The last mark of her existence belonged not to her, but to him. The funeral itself became a stage for control. Mourners praised her for her service, not her soul. They spoke of her loyalty, her modesty, her obedience. Her own story was swallowed. The cruelest truth was that many wives accepted this fate, for they had been taught from birth that silence was virtue, that obedience was honor, that their lives were measured not in freedom, but in submission. To be remembered as loyal, silent, and dutiful was not seen as tragic in their world. It was seen as the highest praise a wife could receive. But beneath those words lies the darkness. Beneath those stones lies the silence of countless lives never truly lived. For the wives of Rome, death was not liberation. Their chains extended beyond the grave, their voices erased, their memories reshaped, their existence owned forever. The eternal shackles of Roman marriage reached past the boundaries of life, binding women not only in their bodies, but in their very legacies. Across centuries, their tombstones remain, cold, unfeeling, carved with the same words. A chorus of silence stretching through time. They whisper of lives bound in obedience. They testify to marriages built on control. They remind us that in Rome, a wife never truly belonged to herself. Not in youth, not in motherhood, not in death. This was a final cruelty. To live as a prisoner, and to be remembered as a willing one. The chains of Roman marriage did not rust in the grave. They remained, etched in stone, binding wives for eternity. And this is why you would never survive married life in ancient Rome. Marriage in ancient Rome was not the dream imagined by poets or painted by artists. Behind the marble temples, the feasts, and the celebrations lay a truth far darker, carved into the lives of women whose voices were stolen. It was a world where brides were taken from their childhoods, where innocence ended at 12, where a girl's first steps as a wife were steps into captivity. It was a world where husbands ruled like tyrants, their words stronger than any law, their anger deadlier than any sword. It was a world where divorce shattered women with a whisper, where reputations crumbled overnight, and where a woman could be discarded like a broken vessel. It was a world where violence lived in silence, hidden behind doors that neighbors heard but never opened, where wives endured bruises, fear, and humiliation, with no law to shield them, no court to hear their cries. It was a world where obedience was demanded, where silence was praised, where women were reduced to shadows in their own homes. It was a world where love outside marriage was punished with blood, where a glance, a smile, a whisper could mean exile, torture, or death. It was a world where childbirth, the very duty Rome prized most, was a battlefield that claimed countless lives, where mothers died in agony, remembered not for their suffering, but for their service. It was a world where even death brought no release. Tombstones carved by husbands praised not joy, not spirit, not love, but obedience. Eternal shackles etched into stone, binding wives forever in silence. This was the true face of marriage in Rome. Not romance, not partnership, not freedom, but a life traded for obedience, a body demanded for heirs, a voice buried in duty. To marry in Rome was to surrender everything, to live in silence, to endure pain, to risk death with every birth. It was not a bond of love. It was a bond of control, a bond forged in fear. This is why no heart, no matter how strong, could survive the dark bonds of Roman marriage. The empire is gone. The marble has crumbled. The generals, the senators, the emperors, all are dust. But the whispers of those silent wives remain. Their stories linger in shadows, in the cracks of history, in the tombstones that still bear their chains. They remind us that behind the glory of Rome lay broken lives, that the empire's triumphs were built not only on conquest, but on silence, the silence of women trapped in marriages they could not escape. Their voices may have been erased in life, but their truth endures, a truth too dark for Rome to celebrate, a truth hidden for centuries, now uncovered. If this tale of ancient Rome unsettled you, know this: history hides even darker secrets. Across kingdoms, across empires, across centuries, love has been twisted into cruelty. Marriage has been used as a weapon. Hearts have been broken, silenced, and destroyed in ways the world tried to forget. But we will not forget. Here, the forbidden stories return. The tales of dark marriages, of forbidden loves, of secrets buried in shadows. Subscribe to Dark Courtships. Join us as we open history's locked doors, as we bring back the stories the past tried to bury.